start the meeting. Well, so welcome everyone to the World Court of Human Rights Coalition meeting for the end of June 2024. Our guest speaker today will be Betty Wambua, who I will introduce momentarily. I wanted to thank everyone for coming, and I know there's a few new people who have shown up today, but for time's sake, if you wouldn't mind in the chat putting your name and any particular affiliation that you might have, so we know why you're interested in the World Court of Human Rights as a future court and the coalition. So thank you for that. Just a quick update. Wanyaka, who you can see, Wanyaka Gituku, is our world communications manager. She and I had a wonderful meeting yesterday where we talked about our public outreach. And we met to discuss a communication strategy that she had drafted, which includes objectives, target audiences, key messaging, outreach tools, events, campaigns, partnerships, and as well as coalition measurement and evaluation. So we'll be working on that strategy and implementing it, of course, over the next 6 months and year. And then in July, I'm hoping, at the end of July, our meeting will be with both Wanyaka Gituku, Rosalind Minuve, and our government outreach coordinator for the Americas, a woman named Valeria Gaetan. So that will be for them to introduce their government outreach strategies and the communications strategy to everyone in the coalition. So now, with no further ado, I'll introduce Betty with a little bit of information about her. So Ms. Wambua is a senior program attorney for justice system interventions at the International Justice Mission, where she provides legal representation for survivors of human rights violations, police abuse of power, and child sexual assault. She also develops and supports initiatives geared towards legislative and policy reform within the criminal justice system. She's represented civil society organizations in a task force for developing and drafting guidelines for investigation of terrorism and terrorism financing cases, where she lobbied the task force to expressly recognize victims' rights in the guidelines. She's also conducted extensive research on the entrenchment of the role of victims' counsel in criminal proceedings. Ms. Wambua volunteers at the LSK Public Interest Litigation, Human Rights, and Legal Aid Committee. It is possible that her colleague, Joseph Kariuki, who conducts communications at the International Justice Mission, may also join us and give some background in their work today. So I want to thank Rosalind Minuve, our Africa's government outreach coordinator, for reaching out to Betty to have her come today. Thank you for that, Rosalind. And of course, I really sincerely appreciate Betty, you joining us today. And I think we should start so everyone's aware, just in case this happens in the middle of the meeting. If Betty, Wanyaka, and Rosalind, the three of you who are living in Kenya, if you can tell us a little bit more, Betty, if you want to start, about what's going on in Kenya right now, so we know in case the internet we have intermittent internet problems. So Betty, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, thank you so much, David, for the great introduction. Yes, I'm Betty Wambua from Kenya, and this is a very interesting time for me as an attorney when the youth, we are calling them Generation Z. So the Gen Z are leading us in the protest against the financial bill. So this bill seeks to increase taxation over a lot of things that affect the basic human rights, things that affect like children's diapers, things that affect ownership of motor vehicle, ownership of land, things that really matter to the Kenyans. So I think the protest was organized digitally, unlike previous protests where we have political leaders championing for the people to come together and protest. So this one was done very differently. The government never saw it coming. We just had thousands of youth come out. We have churches supporting the protests. We have the middle class out protesting. And like in previous protests, like last year, we had a lot of protests, but we didn't have like the backing of the middle class like we have this time. So it's very interesting. And for me as an attorney, we have spent the last many days trying to bail out protesters because they keep being arrested. It has been very peaceful, especially last week was very peaceful. And we have had still police officers arresting peaceful protesters. And when they when they're taken to the police stations, they are charged with offenses that they did not commit because the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution is refusing to charge them under the protest offenses like unlawful assembly, rioting. So now they have changed tact. So they're not changing the charges to more serious charges like threatening to kill, charges that attract higher penalties. So now we have to stay at the police stations, at the courts, trying to bail people out. I would invite my fellow Kenyans to add on the same.
Wanyaka or Rosalind, would you like to add some additional comments to the situation in Kenya?
Thank you, David. Whatever Betty has said, that is the situation as it is on the ground. And the only platform I can say is the major use of the digital platform plus the social media, what we are seeing in Kenya, because there's no gathering that these people are gathering physically. All the communication and the strategy is just in the social media. So the power of social media, there's also the role of the youth who are the champion of whatever is happening currently in our country. And it shows that there is a unity beyond tribal lines and political lines. As Wanyaka mentioned, definitely I work with the government. It is a sad state of affairs in our young ones being provoked and killed innocently, yet they were not harmed. But later today in the afternoon, the president was able at least to tone down to say that he won't sign the financial bill. But then again, unless it's taken back to the parliament, definitely we know it will be adopted after 21 days. Then they still say that tomorrow we expect them to march 1 million youths to march against the bill. And those who are in social media, when you check the tactics, now it's not about the finance bill 2024, but they have gone ahead to say all they want is that the president go down and the leaders. So I think this world court would have been effective. It was already in place because we don't know who our politicians and our president, they're playing puppet to who or who. So we can't really say what is motivating them, but we want to thank at least God, because from the speech today, I know at least tomorrow, even if the demonstrations are there, they won't be bad as they would have been. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Betty and Rosalind. Wanyaka, would you like to add any thoughts?
I mean, they say pretty much everything, but like I'd said earlier, it's not even so much about paying taxes. Kenyans are okay paying taxes. It's how these taxes are used. It's a wastage of resources. It's them living in opulence on our money. It's corruption. Those are the things that Kenyans are fighting, and that's the reason why what Rosalind has said is, even if the president has not signed the bill today, there's still demonstrations going on tomorrow. And now it's not about the bill anymore, it's about accountability. So yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's a really good thing. It's a beautiful development in Kenya, because one, our political conscience has been raised. People are a bit more aware. We're moving past our tribal lines. And this, as Betty has said, it was a middle class resistance, because in fact, one of the politicians said that people are filming themselves protesting with iPhones and going to KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, afterwards. And it's a beautiful thing to see. That's all I'll say.
Thank you, Wanyaka. Yeah, well, it shows the power of the people, us as citizens, whether it's citizens of Kenya, citizens of Africa, or citizens of the world, to change our world for the better, for ourselves, for each other. It looks like Alan has a question. Go ahead, Alan.
Thank you so much. And our thoughts with all of you in Kenya. Our organisation, World Future Council, is preparing a statement of concern. And we're just wondering, well, one of our council members was actually there and got tear gassed, Alma Obama. You may know her. She's a sister of Barack Obama. She's one of our council members. She was tear gassed. Her daughter was also roughed up in the protest. So, we want to support our people and also our colleagues. What would your suggestions be in terms of, because as you said, that the tax bill is going back to Parliament. What would you think would be the main things that we outside of Kenya should raise in terms of support for particularly the young people who have come together, in these protests? Are there key things that we should be calling for and alerting, in our public statement of concern about what's happening in Kenya?
Okay, I think Beck will be best place to answer that. But if I'm to say anything, for me, stop the killings, stop the extrajudicial killings. That will be very important to raise because a lot of people have lost their lives. Some of the protesters who were protesting were peaceful, but they got killed. They do have a right to protest, but they got killed, So this is some of the things that you could probably talk about, but Betty's probably in a better place, and Rosalind, to answer that.
I actually do agree with you, Wanyaka, because one of the issues we have in Kenya is that we do not have a law, and I was going to talk about it later, but I should mention it now since it has come up. We do not have a law criminalizing enforced disappearance, and we've had a lot of people being disappeared since the protest began. I think today I spent the entire day looking for a famous Twitter person, an influencer, who had been disappeared for 3 days. And today, at least, we're able to know which court he was, and we were able to have him released unconditionally. So we don't know where he has been for the 3 days. We don't know what has happened to him. And Kenya is a signatory to the Convention on Protection of People like Persons Against Enforced Disappearance. But the government has over and over been giving excuses. They are not criminalizing the offense of enforced disappearance. So that is one of the most important things that we need to call out, because we are really agitating as CSOs to have Kenya criminalized enforced disappearance. And of course, now what Wanyaka talked about, there is a lot of police killing. We have a lot of extrajudicial killings happening. The numbers are unclear. So we need proper investigations to be done, everybody to be accounted for, because the government is evading it, just saying it's 6 people. But we know there are more than that. I'd invite Rosalind to chip in.
Yeah, Betty, I agree with what Wanyaka and Betty is saying. And then again, also, I think the issue of governorship, whereby the president feels like he's superior. But again, in Kenya, there is no one who is above the law. But over and over, we have seen our presidents use excess power, they break law, and nothing is really happening. But from this demonstration and just giving this in confidence, and working with the Ministry of Interior, I can assure you, even I think for once, I think even the cabinet and the CS, the PAs, they were just against it. We are just doing it because it's work. And there were also mechanisms they deployed just to ensure that things don't go bad as it was yesterday. But then again, I think the police were overwhelmed, and also the police were overwhelmed, and then they used the military. I think Betty will discuss, because today I saw the LSK, they have taken the cabinet secretary for military and the National Assembly to court for use of the military on the Kenyans against the constitution. It beats logic. It really beats logic, even as the role the government is ruling the people, because there is no way we can be sending our regular police officers to Haiti and yet use the military on the people of Kenya. Yet the military, the force that the military is supposed to use it is on external aggression, or maybe on people that are threatening the sovereignty of the country, but there's misuse of power. So I think that was the highest thing. But I think the president has realized that it's like he is alone in all this, because even the cabinet secretaries, despite the fact that the politicians voted for the bill, it's because, they were bribed. There are rumors of money. They were given the money, yes. Then also definitely dirty secrets that if you don't support the bill, maybe the anti-corruption will be on your neck, you might lose your seat. So this will it's more like a man-eat-man society. But we are just hoping that through this generation, this demonstration, that the voice of the people will be heard. and we go back to enjoy the relative peace that we have enjoyed in Africa. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Betty, Rosa, and Wanyaka. Well, Alan, I hope that covered your question. We'll have more time for questions, of course, at the end of the conversation today in about a half hour or so. I do have one quick follow-up, I guess, Betty, before we move into your explanation of your background and your human rights litigation and how that might intersect or engage with a future World Court of Human Rights. And that's just a quick maybe historical lesson for us about the government in Kenya, and that if the president refuses to sign the bill, in a sense, I guess, is that like a veto? And is it possible that Parliament could still override that and still pass the finance bill?
So what happens if the president doesn't assent to the bill, it becomes law automatically after 21 days. And that is where Rosling is saying, and Wanyaka also, we still have a problem because he hasn't signed it, but the process continues. We just want the bill just removed completely, because in 21 days, that bill is going to become law.
I see. Okay, so yeah, and the people have to continue protesting if they don't want that bill to continue to go through, despite the president not signing. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Betty. Okay, so Betty, if you can tell us a little bit more about how you got into human rights litigation, how you came to the justice system interventions at the International Justice Mission, so we can understand your background in human rights, and how then, as we move forward, can talk about that, the link of your work in that, as well as some of your volunteer work, and how that might intersect with a future World Court of Human Rights. So please, the floor is yours now to tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this field.
Okay, thank you, David. I'll just switch off my video because we have had an internet shutdown and the bandwidth is still not very okay, so that you can hear me clearly. If you stop hearing me at any point, please.
Sure. Yeah, we can hear you perfectly now.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so as you read in the bio, I was previously working as a public prosecutor under the Office of the Public Prosecutions. It's in retrospect now, I can see how different that was, and what really made me think about just focusing on human rights as a full-time job. Not, you see, as an attorney in public prosecutions, you're not fully doing human rights work, it's criminal. And I realized that my hands were really tied as a public prosecutor, because there are times I wanted to make a proper decision to charge. Like the cases I looked at and said, we shouldn't really charge this person. But because of sometimes political influence, sometimes calls coming from above, as a public servant, your hands can really be tied. So it was quite difficult. And sometimes I looked at cases that I wondered why in the first place people were arrested, like cases concerning asylum seekers. Like, why will we charge people coming from Eritrea to seek asylum in Kenya? Because it's very common to have refugees, asylum seekers, sometimes even trafficked people who are in the country. They're just arrested for lack of documentation. They're arraigned in court, treated like criminals. And when you read the file, you just realize that sometimes, like for my life-changing case, when now I decided now this was it, I just need to move into full-time human rights, was handling cases for the trafficked people from Nepal and Lebanon. I think we have had such many trafficked young girls. It's quite silent and quiet in Kenya. People really do not know about it, but it's very common. These girls are trafficked, brought into Kenyan clubs, work in very bad situations, exploited, then they're arrested. Yeah, and you see they're just victims. So my last case, I think, that I did for the refugees, we made sure they were asylum seekers, they had not been registered as refugees yet. We made sure that they were processed at the Refugees Affairs Office and that they were protected. We also ensured that the trafficked girls were treated fairly. I think that was my wake-up call to, I really need to do more than just prosecuting people, just prosecuting everyone who's brought to us by investigators. And you see, the argument with investigators is about state security. So they'll tell you this is national security, you have to prosecute. Yeah, so it becomes very difficult to make a different decision. But working closely with the judge or the magistrate, you're able to make the right decision and send them to the correct offices. But unfortunately, this still goes on. Yeah, so that's how I found myself looking for a job in human rights sector. And when International Justice Mission came calling, I was very happy to join the team.
Okay, and can you tell us, and if you want to have Joseph join in a little bit to tell more, that's perfectly fine, your colleague, Joseph Kariuki, but tell us a little bit more about the work you do specifically at International Justice Mission. What does a normal day, look like for you?
Okay, so we do not have very many normal days at IJM. Yeah, I'm saying that because our program, the program I mainly work in is police abuse of power. So I'll be going through my day representing families of victims who have been killed by police. Sometimes it's the victims who have been, like if someone has been arrested and arraigned in courts because of trumped up charges. So at any day, we have people we're rescuing, we get calls, referrals that someone has been arrested, so we have to rush. Then we have the families reaching out. Sometimes we just look at maybe the news, then you follow up to find out which family, like now, the children who were killed during this protest, we have to meet the family. You have to, everything that happens that involves police killing people, it's like the main thing we do. And we also support government agencies. So we'll be also in training police officers on the use of force, on their own manuals, so that they are able to be sensitized on their manuals. We also support the internal affairs unit so that it can hold police accountable, because that is the mandate of the internal affairs unit. So we help in funding and resources in government agencies to ensure that they're able to meet their mandate so that the system can work for everyone. So the cases I work in, we also do gender-based violence. Although initially we had child sexual assault as one of the programs we are doing. I think the last time we had that program was, I think, in 2018. But up to now, we still do the cases because they are in the system. There are cases that were preferred back then, like the cases started off in 2018. Up to now, the cases are still going on. Some of the cases, like I have a case for a young boy was defiled by his football coach. It started in 2017. I'm still doing the case now. That's when we're going for the defense hearing. It's probably going to take another year. The earliest that case can conclude probably is late this year. So you see how much time it takes, how slowly the wheels of justice grind. And when it comes to the police cases, it's where most of our energy goes into. They're very sad cases. We lost our colleague Willie Kimani in 2016. It's a very publicized case, so I can't mention his name. He was very convinced that his client was innocent, so he really pursued that case. The client had been charged with robbery with violence. It's a very serious offense, attracts death penalty. So he really insisted that IJM takes up the case, and he was in the case when they were abducted. Him, the taxi driver, and his client, they were tortured to death. The case took 8 years. It was concluded last year, and that was one of our staff. That's why for us, it's very important to hold the police accountable. So among the cases, we do also do the cases for enforced disappearance, as I said. There also are very, very, very bad cases because we don't have the support of the law. We don't have the proper framework to charge offenders under enforced disappearance. So when we go to court, we have no body, we have no death certificate, there is no proof of death. So they're charged with abduction, which attracts a very, very little penalty. Well, essentially this was torture and murder. So that's like our normal day. So the other cases, one of the interesting cases I think I'm handling at the moment comes from protests and post-election violence. For instance, like right now we are in the middle of these cases. We are going to the police stations, and as I had said, we are going to court trying to have people acquitted. And I think a month ago, I was able to have 5 people acquitted who had been arrested in protest. It's becoming so common to just arrest people and take them to court and prefer charges, which is very wrong. And I'm happy that we have the first case where the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is charging police commanders under the International Crimes Act. So Kenya has ratified the Rome Statute, and I'm really happy that we have a case that I'm doing where I have over 60 clients. There are over 40 charges of crimes against humanity, crimes against humanity of torture, murder, and rape. So you can imagine all these people. One person was murdered, it was a child, the rest were torture and rape. It's really, really bad. But the commanders, the 12, they've been fighting the charges at the High Court. So we're waiting for the court to direct us to give us a ruling end of July on whether we can proceed, whether they can proceed with the charges, because they had been charged under the International Crimes Act. It's the first time, so they're saying that the court doesn't have the jurisdiction. We need a specialized judge. We need probably an odd number of judges to hear the case, that we need to use the ICC procedure, the one at the International Criminal Court, not the Kenyan Criminal Court. So it's just new for all of us, but it's quite interesting. So we also have psychologists who support us, support the clients. So in a normal day, it's going to be a whole team working on different cases with so many moving parts at any point. Yes, but it's a job we enjoy to do.
Okay, thank you, Betty, for giving us a more rounded picture of your day-to-day work and some of the difficulties and frustrations that you face. One of the last points you're making, which I find really interesting and certainly relates to our work to try build a coalition for a World Court of Human Rights within a global justice system. I know, and Alan can mention this maybe later, there's a Legal Alternatives to War project that's focusing on the International Court of Justice. We also work with people in the International Criminal Court Coalition, but it seems like you're actually already trying to go outside of the Kenyan justice system to get justice for some victims at the ICC. I guess I want, if you could explain a little bit more about what, if you've taken this all the way to the Supreme Court or the High Court in Kenya, then why specifically maybe go to the ICC instead of perhaps the African Court on Human and People's Rights? Why this pathway? And tell us more about that, please.
Okay, so with this case, because we are pursuing criminal accountability, our long agenda is to just reform the police force. And the way we want to do it is to hold the police accountable. So previously, we have been charging just the perpetrators, like if you're able to tell which police shot somebody. But now, in terms of when it comes to post-election violence, and at that time, you might not, as the victims or survivors, they're not able to say which police officer shot them. Of course, the police know, because the commander knows the arrangement of the police, who was in which squad, who had which gun, how many bullets, the ammunition every officer had. But to see, this is not information they're going to give the investigators. So it becomes very difficult to pursue criminal accountability against the direct perpetrators. But because the Rome Statute provides for complementary jurisdiction, because for ICC, before you go to the International Criminal Court, the court requires the national jurisdiction to have either been unable or unwilling to prosecute. So our basis was, why not prosecute domestically? Because that is what the Rome Statute says, that you need to be willing and able. Our courts are able, and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is willing. The problem was that they were not receiving the proper backing. So we came in as civil society organizations to support them lobby for the charging of the commanders, because if you go after the commanders, you're able to get justice for the survivors without having to prove charges against the direct perpetrators. And we can't go to the African court because we'd be looking at reparations, while at the moment we are looking at accountability from a criminal perspective. So maybe if we're able to get criminal accountability against these commanders who are actually very senior people in the police force, in the National Police Service, if we're able, and I believe we'll be able to hold them accountable, we can now move to the High Court for reparations, for compensation, and other different forms of reparations for the victim. But the reason we have chosen this path right now is because we want our victims to be close to where the case is, for them to see justice unravel before their eyes, and to just encourage them that this can be done before we go to maybe the ICC, which means it would mean that we need to prove that we have been unable and unwilling to do so. And history has shown that ICC cases can fail. We have seen the 2 Kenyan cases, what happened. Witnesses were disappeared, a lot of political influence happened, the Attorney General refused to give information, and they were saying at that time, in fact, the people taken to the ICC at the time were agitating for prosecutions at the domestic level. So this time we're saying the prosecution is here, it's domestic, kindly support it. And we are really, really lobbying for support for those cases so that we can see, for once, the International Crimes Act, to see it tested, like to have international crimes for the first time in Kenya prosecuted locally. After, we can always now go to the African Court for reparations. But meanwhile, we are just looking at the criminal accountability as a deterrent measure.
Do you, either as an individual attorney in Kenya or through the international justice system, do you have some ability to advocate in a certain direction on these kinds of cases, to push it forward, or to get civil society involved to take a certain direction?
Yeah, it's quite a dicey issue, because when the cases delayed, we tried to have media advocacy around it, but we are also careful because of the sub judice rule, because it might be very difficult to talk about the case when it's in court, the High Court case, where there are petitions challenging the prosecution. Then we have the criminal case, the murder charges that haven't taken off. We have been telling the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions to can actually proceed with these cases, because the petitions did not say prosecution of the perpetrators. Why are we not proceeding? So we've tried to do a bit of media advocacy, but it has always been a very sensitive issue. It's actually quite sensitive, because even when we need to meet, the victims are still unidentified. We have concealed the identities, and even the people participating, like I'm only able to talk about certain things about the cases. We're also able to disclose very little, even in our office. We can't, it's not a case to discuss publicly, because it's also quite sensitive because of the nature of the offenses and how grave they are and how much opposition they are getting from government.
Okay. Well, so as a human rights litigator and defender, either you individually or also at the International Justice Mission, do you feel like you have or how do you feel about your independence to be able to act on behalf of victims? Do you feel sometimes that there's some kind of squelching of your abilities, or can you act independently from the government and from police authorities?
Yeah, we try to. It's being a victim's. Let me talk about my experience as a victims counsel. It's quite difficult, especially first of all in our adversarial system. The adversarial system recognizes first who? The accused person, the prosecutor. So even when you come into the proceedings as a victims counsel, sometimes the court even wonders, why do you have to come and bother us? We have the defense. Why can't you just work closely with the prosecutor? The victim is the witness for the prosecutor. Why do you have to make the proceedings longer, lengthy, complex? You see, but now we have to assert our role as the victims counsel, that we're here to advance the victims' right, because we have a law, we have the Victim Protection Right. It was enacted in 2014, but we haven't really, I can't say really that the victims' rights have been fully realized as expected. Now, also for me, from what David, you've asked, there are cases where even the prosecutor asks me, why are you following this case too much? Or why do you think you have to be in the case? And those cases are really bad, because we only come into cases, like if it's the police cases, they're usually the accused person. So if you're a prosecutor and you're wondering why I'm in the case, it's also a risky affair, because they usually, when the police officers see us, and we are known as International Justice Mission to really push for accountability. So when they see that we are in the case, it becomes even a security issue, because now they feel that we are not interfering. Maybe if they wanted to corrupt somebody, they wanted to interfere in the proceedings, if they wanted to hide evidence, you cannot do it, because we have people who help us with sourcing evidence that was not available to the prosecutor. We really go out of our way to make sure that the survivors get justice. So we try to assert our role as victims and human rights defenders, but sometimes the courts, it depends sometimes with the judge, sometimes it depends on the prosecutor. And victim representation of victims is evolving in Kenya. It hasn't, previously you couldn't even ask questions. I couldn't ask witnesses for the prosecution questions, because I'm not a prosecutor. Yet the law allows us to even avail extra evidence to examine. But the matter went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that we have a right to cross-examine. But then it said that how to participate in a trial will be left to the court, to the trial court. So sometimes the court is not very open to our participation. So we have different experiences on different days.
Sure. Okay. So I guess related to that, could you tell us about your concerns regarding people in positions of power, such as the police, maybe even the courts, government leaders, and parliamentarians, well, in Kenya and maybe even around the world, that have can get away with rights violations, or that have impunity for their actions?
I really think that politicians, maybe police commanders, generally just top government, top leaders are able to get away with a lot. There's a lot that goes undeterred. There's a lot of impunity, especially Kenya. We have a corruption problem. So your witnesses may be both. In fact, sometimes we are the ones who are insisting to someone, you need justice. You yourself, you need justice, and we have to go after this, no matter how senior they are. But because sometimes, if, for instance, corruption cases, people get threatened, intimidated. So a lot of corruption still continues. I don't know if you have followed Kenyan news, but recently, I feel, was it last year? Before the director of public prosecution's term ended, he just withdrew cases for corruption against politicians outrightly in broad daylight. So this happens a lot, and it's really, really can frustrate people in the human rights, because you feel like there's a legal framework, there's an institutional framework, what is not working. Yeah. So now I think having a world court on human rights is really important, because you get an extra layer of accountability, and also you also get fresh jurisprudence on these issues.
Yeah, that was actually my next thought to ask you about what you think about a World Court of Human Rights, both from a perspective of this would be helpful to me as a human rights litigator, but also how you might have some concerns about a future World Court of Human Rights and what that would mean for you as a litigator in Kenya. Can you tell us sort of both perspectives, your thoughts, both maybe positively and some concerns that you might have?
Yeah, I really do think we need a world court, first because, as I said, we pursue criminal accountability, but once we conclude these cases, we go we either file a civil case or a constitutional petition for compensation for our clients' families, or our clients who are unlawfully held in custody. So we always go back to, after the criminal accountability, we also go back to compensation and reparations. So I think this court would really benefit us, because if we exhaust the Kenyan regime, if we go up to the Supreme Court and we are not able to get compensation for our clients, or if we're not able to have the Supreme Court support our clients, so we are able to either go to the African court and upwards until we get to the to the World Court. So I think it adds hope to the human rights work. And again, when you have an additional layer of accountability, this is where I look at it. When we lost cases at the ICC, we were pursuing individual criminal liability, accountability. But on the ground here in Kenya, we have a lot of direct perpetrators who were never prosecuted. So we have had a number of petitions arising out of the 2007-2008 post-election violence against the 2017 post-election violence. I believe if we did both, for instance, if we pursued, even if it's ICC on the crimes against humanity, if we also had a world court looking at the reparations and also holding the perpetrators accountable, we'd have an extra, like a complementary layer. Because when we lost these cases at the ICC, our survivors on the ground were not supported by the Trust Fund for Victims, the one for the International Court. The judgments that have never been enforced. So I think if we had both at that time, we'd have pursued their rights, they are not based on the international human rights, would have also pursued as a complementary regime, separate from the criminal accountability. And probably they would have gotten some redress, which is not criminal in nature, possibly. So I really do feel that we need that court. And I also think in terms of state cooperation, the issues of sovereignty will always come up. But I would think that even for the perpetrators, this is my personal opinion, I think that probably they will cooperate with a court that is civil in nature, assuming that the world court would be civil in nature, not criminal. I would think that they would submit themselves to the jurisdiction of that court faster, or they would cooperate more than individual criminal liability at the International Criminal Court, because at the ICC, you'll probably get a jail sentence. Yeah, so I really do think it will support our work, and also it will promote deterrence. I think knowing that there are so many international courts after you, it would really help. And the other thing that I noted lacks at I'm really not talking about the ICJ much because the jurisdiction is about states, but looking at the ICC, we are not able to prosecute corporations, yet there's a lot of ecocide happening. There's so much that big corporations are doing, multinational corporations are doing, and they are not being prosecuted for. And I think a world court will have jurisdiction over even these corporations, because ICC is focused on individual criminal liability. So yeah, so I have well, of course, the concerns that I have are on the success of the court, given that we have seen in the past that state sovereignty is always an hindrance to cooperation, and international courts and tribunals, and just they're always based on state cooperation. So if the states do not cooperate, then they're not able to, they issue sanctions, but enforcement has always been a problem. I think even at the African Court, we have so many decisions that have not been enforced. We have the Ogiek community. They got a judgment here in Kenya. They got a judgment at East African Court of Justice, our regional court. They went to Africa Court. They still got a judgment, but they were still evicted from the Mau Forest. So enforcement or enforcing the orders will always be a problem. Yeah, so those are some of the concerns that I would have. Yeah, about having, but mainly it's the cooperation from states, and also the world superpowers. We've seen how Iraq, Britain case went. They were nothing really happened. The case US, Afghanistan. We can even see what is happening in Ukraine. We can see what is happening in Israel, Gaza. So there will always be issues of power plays. Yeah. So if they're able to, if we are able to overcome and promote and encourage states to cooperate, because again, funding comes from the states, the state parties, I think they would then have a good court to protect the rights of survivors.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate how you've explained how a World Court of Human Rights could be complementary to the ICJ to the ICC, especially if it's providing civil judgments, which would then maybe encourage, as you said, parties to actually participate when there's not that maybe fear of a prison sentence, but there's still some kind of relief that's possible for victims. And of course, the idea of sovereignty, and this is true, it doesn't matter which court it is, whether it's the ICJ, the ICC, or a future World Court of Human Rights, or an anti-corruption court, or a World Environmental Court. We do think that the World Court of Human Rights would also encompass the environment and deal with corporations as well as individuals and government leaders. But there's always that question of cooperation in a world where there's lack of global governance, where we don't necessarily see ourselves as world citizens, united. Then there's going to be this question of, will there be proper enforcement of cases? Will cases even be brought forth just because of the politics that are going on? So
Yeah, so
go ahead,
yeah,
please.
okay, so I think that will always be a challenge, but I looking at the ICC and ICJ, despite the issues concerning state cooperation, they have worked, maybe not to the expected, maybe not the standards we wanted, not maybe to in terms of cases that have taken. But I think even now having an ICJ, Somalia to Kenya to the ICJ the other day, it gives you an opportunity to get redress, even if they will not, even if enforcement would be a challenge, but at least there's hope for the citizens of this world. There's hope for everyone, that there's somewhere you can seek redress. Yeah, so I still believe that even with the challenges the ICC is facing, there are a lot of victims who have received reparations and redress from the ICC. If it did not exist, there are a lot of people who would have gone unpunished. And also, the deterrence issue is also very important, because just knowing there is that court over there, and over time, I think over time people get sensitized about these cases. Like in Kenya now, after having 2 cases at the ICC, every Kenyan knows there's an ICC. You see, we are pushing, and you can see even the citizens get power. When Bashir went to South Africa, he has an arrest warrant. When he went to South Africa, the people of South Africa agitated, for his arrest, not the government. The government hosted him, but the people in South Africa agitated for his arrest. They went to the High Court, filed a petition, and Bashir had to flee from South Africa. And that time he was a president. So it shows you that it works. It may not work fully, but it does work. And states might not cooperate, but the citizens put them to task to cooperate. Because even now, because of what is happening, Kenyan citizens have been telling the president, we will remind ICC that you have a case at the ICC. You see, so it's power to the people.
Yes. Oh, I wholeheartedly support what you've just explained. The power of these global institutions that we've created can link to us as the individual, and the individuals can actually see the power of them in their daily lives. I think that's so important. Thank you for sharing that thought. Well, so I'd like to open up the floor to anyone who has any questions, because we only have about 7 to 10 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions for Betty about her litigation work, her volunteer work, anything? And while we're waiting, I do have another question, as you guys all are thinking of, everyone's thinking of questions, and that would be, tell us maybe, Betty, about your civil society work, because I know you were working with that task force on terrorism, how you engaged and excited people to work with you in civil society to make a change for victims' rights, for example, and maybe other volunteer work that you've done with civil society. So, because we're trying to build this coalition for this court, and we'd like to learn from people such as yourself, the litigators who are out in the field making this happen.
Okay, I'll talk about my work with the task force, and then I'll invite my colleague Kariuki. I don't know, Joseph, are you in the call? He leads us in coalition building and advocacy. Okay. So yeah.
Yeah, he's hard to drop out because he's having really poor internet.
Okay, okay, can speak up a bit about it then. So at the ODPP, we have a very good relationship with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and other government agencies, because we try to support their work, because we usually say when an international justice mission is no longer working in Kenya, the government agency should be able to just do their work well. So we really come in to support what they do, because they do very great work, just that sometimes the resources are limited. So we come in to see what to do. So when they were drafting the guidelines for investigation and prosecution of terrorism cases, our organization was invited, and having worked with government before, I was seconded to the task force. When I got to the task force, I realized that everyone was talking about the rights of the accused person, because the anti-terror police really does violate rights of accused persons. And our Constitution of Kenya 2010 is a very good constitution. It comes to protection of the rights of accused persons, unlike our previous constitution. So over the years in prosecution, I realized that the system had changed. When a lot of violations happen at the investigation stage, but in the courtroom, I would say a lot has changed over the years. So I think I could say that most courts, if not all, uphold the right to a fair hearing. The rights of arrested persons, that's where usually the problem is. So when I got to the task force, I realized everyone was talking about the accused persons, and I wondered, because terrorism cases affect a lot of victims. In fact, one of the discussions we had was, we have a victim in terrorism cases. Are they faceless? Then I just remembered how we have a whole, what is it called? There's at the bomb blast where the American embassy was bombed, there's a whole wall with names of people who lost their lives during the bomb blast. At the Westgate terror attack, there's a memorabilia also, names of, friends, family, people were killed, but no one seemed to remember these people. So I really had to lobby for the rights of the victims to be provided for, because victims need to be treated with dignity, victims of crime. Because sometimes how investigators even approach victims, it's like you're the victim, you're traumatized by the crime, and they approach you as if you're at fault for what happened to you. So I had to emphasize on issues of confidentiality, dignity, safety, just recognizing that these people, because you can't do an investigation. The reason in the first place where we have an investigation or a prosecution will take place is because someone has been hurt, someone's rights have been violated. We wouldn't have the case if we did not have victims. So I really lobbied for their rights to be included. And when I left the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and started representing victims, I also realized that it was difficult to represent. As I had said, some courts really do not allow us to. You have to seek leave. It's not straightforward like the way a defense counsel or prosecutor can go to court and just represent people. You have to seek leave in every case. So I have been lobbying for the rights of victims. I did at the task force. So the final document has a whole page on victims' rights. I have lobbied for victims' rights at the Law Society of Kenya, where I also volunteer. I have lobbied for victims' rights in training institutions, because now we are telling even lecturers and teaching, schools teaching law, you have to highlight the rights of the victims. Do not just discuss the rights of the accused persons. Victims also have rights. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. So do you, this may be, unless somebody else has a question, maybe this will be the last one. But please chime in if you have a question. And that's really, so I know the law side of Kenya and the you engaged in, were there other NGOs or civil society organizations that you worked with, and how did you engage them?
Okay, so because of the sensitivity of the cases we work in with VOC, which is violence against women and children, and also now police abuse of power, they are sensitive in nature. So you also want to work within a coalition. So as in the program for police abuse of power, we work under the Police Reform Working Group and other coalitions. So what we do, we reach out to organizations who who are working within the same space. So that like now missing coalition was that we just realized how, you know, as I said, Willie Kimani was, our staff was killed. So we also do not want to be working in this area, like to seem like you're doing this alone, while there are other the other NGOs, civil society organizations working on the same space. So we just reach out. We have a partnership, policy partnership advocacy department. So and now Joseph Karuki is dropped from the call. So we reach out to these organizations and ask them, can we work together? And now we are able to draft a working document. We are able to form a coalition. So we have been able to lobby, to just in our circles, to lobby for inclusion also in the coalitions that we were not part or members. We just, maybe if you're aware that there's this coalition that is being formed, we are able to go to the organizations and tell them this is what we are able to do for the coalition. But we, like for us, because our clients usually come from informal settlements, we like working at the community level. So we support justice centers. IGM supported establishment of many justice centers at the community who monitor and record violations. Then now they refer these cases to us so that we also get the cases, because it's hard to just wait for calls on the cases. But if you are supporting a justice center at the community level where the violations are happening, that justice center is able to give you information on what is happening on the ground. And that is what we've done for both our programs. We have justice centers supporting violence against women and children, and we have justice centers supporting our work. Then now in the bigger picture, we are able to team up with other civil society organizations. And it's really helpful because like today we were not able to, when I got many calls today to bail out people, and we don't have money to bail out everyone because this is money that is going to stay in court for a very long time. But within the coalition, we're able to agree, you are going to lead in legal representation, the other team is going to maybe bail out people. So it really helped in terms of resource mobilization and also in avoiding replication of roles, and also helped in saving some money for other causes.
Well, I really appreciate how your work so positively affects people in the community. The individual citizens can really see the importance of the work that you're doing because it dramatically affects their lives in a positive way. Looks like we have one more question because we're already just over the hour. So Alan, go ahead.
Thanks, David. Actually, it's not a question, it's a comment. Firstly, Betty, thanks so much. Incredible work that you're doing. Thanks, David, for organizing this so that we can learn more about this type of work. Really important to look at how we can protect human rights through different mechanisms. And to learn more about that is really important. I think it's really good, David, that you're doing this. You know, these as part of the idea of how to build a World Court for Human Rights, and that should not be a top-down approach of like imposing, you know, some sort of notion of human rights from somewhere outside, but it actually should be really rooted in the human rights coming from the grassroots and the protection of those. So I think it's wonderful that you're, you know, this series of conversations and like learning experiences, because this is one of them, as part of building a process for that. I think that's also what has been part of the other the courts that are there. Not so much the International Court of Justice, because that was established as part of the UN, but the International Criminal Court, that came from civil society. It wasn't a top-down court from governments. And again, it was because civil society saw that there's only so much one can do sometimes at national courts or in local courts or in regional courts. We need an international part of the judicial framework. And that the international courts should work as much as possible closely interrelated. You know, when things can happen at the local or the national level, fantastic, that's good. But when corruption is preventing that, when, you know, government violations, when, you know, when politics is preventing that from happening, we need the international framework as well. So I really appreciate, you know, these conversations. And I'm part of what's called the Impact Coalition for Just Institutions. which is also doing the same sort of thing, looking at the interaction between the international courts, the current ones, what might be good new ones. And I'll just put in the chat there my contact and also the contact of the other convener of the Impact Coalition on Just Institutions in case people are interested. And part of what we're focusing on is taking some of these principles on human rights protection and the importance of judicial processes and courts into the Summit of the Future. Not just what can get adopted in the pact for the future, which the government will agree to, but what we can elevate, what we can talk about, what we can highlight, and having examples of good work on this is really, really important. So thanks a lot. It was a thank you and a keep going comment, not really a question.
Thank you, Alan. Is there an Impact Coalition website yet that we can look at to see what to join, or do we have to go to the separate websites of the organizations involved?
There will be one very soon. It's going to be hosted by Citizens for Global Solutions, but it's not up yet. So I expect hopefully within a week or so.
So people could go to globalsolutions.org right now to find some information, correct?
Citizens for Global Solutions, we have one part of that, the Law Not War, which is the International Court of Justice, but we don't yet have the Impact Coalition page up online yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to invite you, Alan, as a guest for a future coalition meeting. So I appreciate you joining today. So now I guess, Betty, I'd like to give you the last word here. We will have a meeting on July 31st, the end of next month, the last Wednesday of the month, which is our standard meeting time. And I'm hoping, as I mentioned at the top of the hour beginning, that I'm hoping that Rosalind Wanyaka and Val, our two government outreach managers for Africa and the Americas, as well as Wanyaka, our communications manager, will come and talk about the strategies that they're going to be implementing over the next 6 months, next year, and several years, as well as why they got involved in our coalition. But so, Betty, any final words for us as a newly developing coalition to establish, as both you and other participants have said today, global justice and bringing in the power of us as citizens from the grassroots?
I would just say that a lot of lobbying needs to be done. Currently, African countries are generally against international courts. I think after the ICC, I think we saw that many tried to pull out. And I noted from even the African Court of Justice, the African Court on Peoples and Human Rights, only 34 African countries have ratified. Yeah, I've supported I've joined the court. So it seems that the uptake of international courts is not much in Africa, given that if we have only 34 countries for this long, and only I think 8 countries signed the protocol that allows citizens and NGOs to file cases directly. It's only 8 countries. So I think there has to be a lot of lobbying, and also the lobbying has to show why really it is important. How is it different from the ICC, and what it really does for the citizens? Because as I said earlier, I think even in West Africa, a lot of citizens are tired with the leadership. So if you target the citizen and what this means for protection of the rights of the people, I think we are going to get a lot of pressure from the citizens to their leaders why they need to join the courts. Yeah. So I think the bottom up approach will probably work better. And yes, and I'm just grateful for the opportunity to share about my work. And at a very interesting time as this, it gives me hope that what you are doing is important and that it matters.
Well, Betty,
Thank you.
Betty, thank you so much for the time that you spent with us today, especially with a little bit of concern of what's going on in Kenya immediately. So I really appreciate all of your explanations of your own work and how that could intersect and interact with a future World Court of Human Rights. Thanks again. I do hope that you can reach out to the others in the International Justice Mission to see if they would be interested and willing to be a partner organization in support of this coalition for a World Court of Human Rights. Please let me know after the fact. We'll be in touch by email, of course. And once again, thanks everyone, and thanks Betty for being with us today. And we'll look forward to seeing you next month. But please feel free to reach out to any of us. My direct email is david@worldcitizengov.org, david@worldcitizengov.org, or if you wanted to email the Coalition. It's info@worldcourtofhumanrights.net. So anyway, once again, Betty, thank you so much for today and for your time.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, and see you in July.
Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.